should a healthy, mature Christian think about time? Is it a burden or is it a blessing? And how should we, in a mature way, think about it? And even we'll get into how we should use it. But let's start with how should a healthy Christian think about time? Hello and welcome to Calvary Conversations. I'm Shaun LePage, the Ministry Studies Chair of Calvary University, and I'll be your host today. And welcome, gentlemen. Happy New Year.
Hey,
Happy New Year.
Hello. I know that.
Right.
And
We've got the crazy and regular hosts of Calvary Conversations, Tim Haynes, Mike Dodds, and Josh Paxton. It's good to be with you all again. We want to talk today about time. And it seems like for me, every year around the first of the year, questions come up about time and, New Year's resolutions and what it means to use our time well as Christians and those kinds of things. So that's what I'd like to talk about today. And so I'd like to start with this question, and I'll start with you, Dr. Paxton. What does the Bible teach about the reality of time? What comes to your mind when you think about the reality and the parameters and perhaps even the burden of time?
Well, I'm glad I was already turning in my Bible when you directed that towards me, Shaun. So recently, and I didn't read the article, but recently somewhere I saw, it's probably on Facebook, I saw an article title posted about something to do with scientists have decided that the only reason time exists is because there are human beings to mark its passing. Like if it wasn't for human beings, there would not be a concept of time. And I should probably read the article before I talk too much about it. But at any rate, the first thing that pops into my head is in Genesis. So, Genesis, God is creating the world, and right there in Genesis 1:14, and God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And so this is prior to the fall. And so even before the fall, there seems to be a sense to which God worked the measurement of time into creation for our good. What that would have meant for us prior to sin and the fall is a little different than what it means to us now after the effect. We also measure time through getting older and things like that wouldn't have happened prior to the fall. So, but the Bible is quite clear that time is a good thing. Time is something that God created so that we could measure it and so that we could order our lives.
And I think it's really important, Josh, what you said, that it is something that God created. I think I was in my 20s when I took some classes here at the seminary at Calvary. And I remember just really being challenged by my systematic theology book when I realized that I had constrained God, because I always had thought of God as somehow, I always referred to God as sort of in, like you tend to think, people who haven't given this thought tend to think that God is constrained by time. And it's important to understand it is a construct of God that is used to govern our universe, but that we get glimpses of this in John when Jesus says, I am. He refers to himself as I am, making himself equal with the Father. But when the scriptures refer to God as I am, it's intentional. I mean, it's not using a present progressive. It's just using a simple statement of I exist. And it's really important for us as believers to understand, because if you put God within time, then you have made time greater than God. And that has huge implications to theology. So
I kind of want to respond to that because I think that's one of our frustrations is that God has placed us within this system of time. He's beyond it, and so we can't even really fathom that. But I think of Ecclesiastes 3:11 and 12. It says, "He has made everything beautiful in its time. He has also set eternity in the hearts of men." There's a little debate about what that Hebrew word means, but I believe it does mean eternity. And I think the idea is that he's made us aware of, the passage of time and of the reality that we will exist forever somehow, some way. We're aware of eternity, but we're strapped into time. And he goes on and he says, yet, so God set eternity in our hearts, yet they cannot fathom what God has done from beginning to end. So we don't know what God is doing. And unless we have the revelation that God has given us, unless we know that, we don't know what God is up to. We don't understand why the world is the way it is and why time just keeps rolling on and all of the burdens of that. But I think because we're created in God's image, we have this awareness of who we are and the reality of time, and it's actually kind of a burden to us until we understand, like what you were saying, Tim, that God is beyond that time, and someday, He will change our reality, and of course we don't know for sure whether what time will be like in the new heavens and new earth and in heaven, but we have some sense of it won't matter that much because we will be in an eternal state. But Mike, what would you add to this pondering?
What you were just saying, Shaun, and your last comment there, in eternity, not the biggest. We all say, I didn't have enough time.
Yeah.
As a new pastor, a new business person, wherever you're at, there will be the books and methods and software to help you to manage your week, so you can fit everything in it, and it doesn't all fit in. I'm one of those who likes to overplan, or rather, I have a bad habit of overplanning, and then I have no margins, no extra time, so things just don't get done. But anyway, we're constrained, like you're saying, with time. And so I can't imagine an eternity where I will get everything done, where I'll have enough time, if we could still measure it like that.
Yeah. And so you're getting into my next question here, and that is, how should a healthy, mature Christian think about time? Is it a burden or is it a blessing? And how should we, in a mature way, think about it, and even we'll get into how we should use it. But let's start with how should a healthy Christian think about time?
If I could pick it up right where I just continue my conversation, you had jotted down a verse that we probably all turn to there in Psalm 90, verse 12. Number our days. And when I saw that in your note there, Shaun, as you were prepping us for our conversation today, I thought of a person, I can't think of who it was, but they sat down somewhere in their early life and calculated how many specific days they would have in life, and then mark that off each. I don't know whether they did it every time at their birthday or the beginning of the year, and it's sort of ghoulish in a sense. I only got 870,000 days left, or whatever it was. but that stuck with me. I still see the image of the guy, but don't remember his name, where he wanted to be responsible. You were asked that question. How should we? Time is a stewardship. I don't know how much time I have, but my life is a stewardship, I think, is what Moses is saying there. Teach me to number my days so I could present to you a heart of wisdom. Meaning I've not just blown it off and go, well, where did that day go? I get hyper about that one too, but we have a stewardship from God for the time that he leaves us here on earth.
Good. Stewardship is a good way to think about time. It's like we have money to spend, right? So, like I was just figuring up, if I die about the same age as my mother died, my father's still living. If I die about the same time my mother died, I have about 8,000 days left. And that's an interesting way to think about it, Mike. Maybe that's a good sober place to start, is just figure out, if God blesses you with long life, how many more days do you have left, and to think of them as stewardship, as we tend to think of stewardship as money, right? But days are actually something that we can in a sense spend, and we only get one chance to spend it, right? So Tim or Josh, what would you add to that? How we should think about time?
I would say contextually on that, if you look at the first part of the psalm, it exalts God as being eternal, everlasting to everlasting. It points out, and with quite accurately, our mortality, and the suffering that that occurs to us in this earth, on this earth, as we in these mortal lifespans. And then it hits us with teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And I don't know if anybody is listening, if you're listening to this and you're a believer, what you got to know is the great blessing of what God has given us: eternal souls alive in him. It is because of Jesus Christ that we have, I almost hate to use the term cheated death, as if God had control over the sovereign picture, but that we're not subject to that. We're not subject to, yes, there's decay, there's death ultimately. And from that comes our angst. From that comes this, what you just described. We're aware of eternity, but we're in mortal bodies, and we're aware of the infinite God, but we're time bound, and this gives us angst. But the gospel is about how that gets erased ultimately, because we receive the gift of eternal life with God, existing in his plane. I don't know how you would describe it, but that should be good news, really, for all of us, I mean, just living every day in the reality that this is not the end.
Amen.
Yeah.
To kind of reflect on your initial question there, Shaun, is it a burden or is it a blessing? I want to say yes. I mean, it's both. There's a sense to which it is both. And as Mike was talking, I was thinking about very, very similar. I remember recalling an individual who basically he figured out, between birth and 18 years old, how many weekends he was going to have with his kids. And so then he specifically used that to ensure that he was prioritizing the time that he had with his children until they became adults and they left the home. And so it can be, a burden in the recognition that we only have so much of it, but it can also be a blessing if we use it wisely to prioritize the things that have real importance in life. I'm sure you guys have probably heard the old phrase, show me what you spend your money on, and I'll show you what's important to you. Well, it's the same with your schedule. I mean, get out your phone and look at your schedule, and I can tell you what's actually important to you by what your schedule looks like.
Yeah, let me throw back at us though. Can we obsess about time? I mean, my wife's always saying, I think we're wasting time here. I'm going, okay, but is there ever a point to relax? Now, I'm not coming back to my wife being negative to her, but she's got a good challenge on one side, and I'm maybe more of too much of a relaxing person at times, is what she's saying. How do Christians, should we respond to that need?
Yeah, I like the choice of relaxing person instead of lazy person. I prefer that as well.
There you go.
My wife
like
says
that.
lazy too often, but
But
thanks.
I think, I think that's a struggle. I think for, as you understand what the Bible teaches and the challenges to number our days and use our time well. There's also embedded in the Ten Commandments is Sabbath rest, right? So,
Yeah.
and
I was just gonna
and I
mention
think
that.
that's actually modeled by God in the beginning before the law and so I think there is a somewhat of a balance, except that we're supposed to work 6 days and rest one day. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of us are working towards resting 4 days and working 3 days or whatever. We would love that, retire at 40 or whatever. And but I think that's a good question, Mike. I think that probably just a good balance is what we should work towards there.
Yeah, my wife too often while I was in the pastorate um, threw the label of workaholic at me, meaning the ministry. And we maybe have some pastors listening. You know exactly what this is. There's no end to the day. When I was in the military as a chaplain, fortunately, we didn't have one person always having to be the duty chaplain. We would pass it around. You'd have it for a week and give it to somebody else. But in the pastorate, you don't have that, meaning the phone can ring 24/7, 365, and you're sort of on all the time. And so there's just that pull. And so how do I plan in, and is it appropriate, or when do I feel guilty about taking rest time and not answering the phone? And wow. So there's a struggle with time, like Josh was saying.
We might need to have another topic on this one, but I'll tell you something, Mike, that I learned when I was, when I was serving overseas in a missionary educator capacity. There were so many needs, and but don't you think that we also can sin by pretending that we are more than we are? In other words, God is the infinite, eternal being. He is omnipresent. He is omnipotent. We're not. And I had to ask myself, Tim, do you really think that God would give you more work to do than it is possible to do in a day? And the answer is no. Like, he expects me to live within my time boundaries. And by the way, there are some things that are incredibly important, like relaxing, like being with family and friends, like taking time to just be and not do. So some of this too is what's imposed on us as to what is work and what is rest. So, but I guess what I'm saying ultimately is that I think that God expects us to live within our limitations, and when we act as if we don't have them, I think we're going against God's design.
That's at the risk of opening another topic there. But Mike, as you're talking about the pastorate and the use of the pastor's time and everything, I can't help but wonder how much of that is a reflection of how our culture does church, as opposed to how Scripture indicates that we should do church, where it's all dependent upon this one guy to do everything, and obviously that one guy is going to get burned out, but so that's probably another conversation, but it's relevant in that we can create our own problems. Like we can create these systems that are culturally recognized, like, right, our Western culture is get her done, go out there with all the gusto and die with your bootstraps on, but that's not necessarily a healthy biblical balance in how we spend our time.
I would say that one of the things I've been thinking about for the past several years now is capacity. And like when you look at say the parable of the talents and the one guy who just buried his treasure in the ground was the one that got the rebuke. The others worked. They used their time as good stewards, and I think that I guess I think it's partly cultural, because I think culturally we want to be on vacation. I mean, we want to be retired and lazy. I mean, that's just built into our culture. And I think that very often we fail to see how much capacity we really have for accomplishing things and using our time well, which actually that kind of leads me into my next question. And I'm going to start with Tim on this. Ephesians 5:15-17. It's translated in various ways, but let me start, which I don't think I've ever said this sentence in my life, but let me start with the King James. All right. The King James says, see then that ye walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Now, my favorite translation, the New American Standard, actually translates that this way: therefore be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time, because the days are evil. And that literally, the Greek is something like working the time. Tim, what do you think it means to redeem the time, or make the most of our time and opportunities?
Well, it's interesting. So I'll go way far back, with this question. I don't believe that man in his fallen state had this kind of angst over what should I do, what should I not do, right? I think he had access to wisdom and access to he didn't have a sin nature to deal with, right? And so these decisions were a lot more natural in terms of making the best decisions of the time we have. It is because we live in the fallen state that I like this. I like the terminology redeeming the time a bit. I mean, the enemy loves. I mean, look at what the enemy has done in our culture. Practically everything is set up to waste our time on a jillion things to distract us from the things that are really important, right? And here the scriptures are telling us redeem that time precisely because the days are evil. Precisely because if you aren't on God's mission to redeem that time, I know, boy, that sounds really old-fashioned. Idle hands are the devil's workshop, right? But it is true. Like, it is when we have nothing to do. There's a problem. We are to be working with God. I mean, what is this? We're created in His image, and what is this? Christ says, "My Father is always at work." Right? He's always got something going on. And yes, He has good rhythms too. He shows us good rhythms of work and rest. But I think this means that we are to just use it very wisely in the face of the alternative, what the fallen world and its system will do with that very time.
Yeah, Tim, I think of as you're talking there, I actually think of Ecclesiastes, and I'm surprised it hasn't come up yet. But
that's where I started.
There's a time to every purpose under heaven, right? So in redeeming the time, I think it also includes, recognizing there's a time to be here at work and doing our job and engaging in conversation. There's a time to be home with our families and engaging with them. There's a time to be involved in ministry outside of the four walls of Calvary or even outside of home. And so there's different times, and yet the importance there is to keep these things in balance, to where I'm not giving so much time to work that I'm neglecting my family, or I'm not giving so much time to my family that I'm neglecting the responsibilities of my job. And so there's a balance that needs to be had here. And that's what's so often difficult, right? Is finding that balance. How do you find the appropriate balance between these different activities?
I was thinking about.
Oh, go ahead.
I was
Go
thinking
ahead.
about what you were saying, Tim, and then Josh, and just that, you know, you know, you were talking about culturally how everything is wired to lead us to waste our time, and I think that could really explain a lot of the angst that we see in our culture, a lot of the depression and anxiety and those kinds of things, because aren't we wired? Aren't we? Isn't it part of our DNA to work, to participate with God in His creative work? And you know, if you know, if you've ever met somebody who was unemployed for a long time, and you know, I've been unemployed for short periods of time, but somebody who's been unemployed for a long period of time, they hated it. You know, I remember a couple years after my dad retired, I was having lunch with him, and I said, "So how's retirement going?" And I won't repeat exactly how he said it, but he did like it. He actually hated it because he didn't like sitting around, you know, basically trying to find things to do with his time. He liked to work, and so I just wonder if, you know, uh, you know, how do we find that balance? Again, God said to work 6 days and rest one day. Are we prone to turn that into too much rest and not enough work, even for our own good and our own you know, kind of emotional well-being?
I had a friend who led these brilliant seminars on healthy rhythms in the Christian life. And one of his laws that he gave us was, remember the sixth day to keep it worky. And I like that law because now I want to be careful with it, because there's nothing wrong with taking your kids out to the park on a Saturday. That is work, right? That's important. Well, it's work on a number of levels. But I mean, it's important. Your most important work is, but you know, what are we doing with the Saturday? Is it doing that, or is it sitting around binge watching a show all day? Right? I mean, that's a different, you know. And I think a lot of times our rhythms get thrown off because we don't say 6 days shalt thou labor, right, and 1 day shalt thou rest. We can try to sneak. We try to do as little as we can through that time, and then find ourselves falling behind. And right, so that's part of the fallen world there. So yeah, that's my take on that.
Well, we are definitely out of time if we stick to our agreed upon length for these is, again, to match the average length of the American commute, 26 minutes, and we're way over that now. But let's just close this out. I think we've covered this, you know, kind of more in a really good theological and philosophical way. Let's talk practically. Should Christians set New Year's resolutions, and if so, what has worked for you guys? Because I mean, of course, we've all heard that you know, something like by the end of February, everybody, you know, like 90% of people have lost their New Year's resolutions. So should we do it, and what's a good way to approach that?
So I don't. I would say that I don't think it's a bad thing to get to the beginning of a new year and think and evaluate areas of your life where you might want to improve. I don't think we could say that that's a bad thing, right. But that should be something that is probably ongoing rather than just being more than once a year.
Good, Mike.
Yeah, we mentioned earlier that, or I think Tim, you were mentioning reading that passage about seasons and times, and you know, or maybe it was Shaun, but God has set in our lives by this creation the marking of time. And one thing we do, you know, you could go back to before there were clocks and everything. They even measured time by seasons, and so we've come to this habit maybe that the beginning of what we measure as a year, and we could do that with the planets. That's how we got the years. There's a cycle to it that we set a point where we're going to begin time, and it's just a natural thing to say, I've got a blank calendar or I've got a blank timer or whatever we have. How am I going to fill it? And so we hear people encouraging us to fill it with good things. As we were talking here, that verse in Ephesians, redeeming our time. I'm also thinking of at the age that I'm at, Moses comments there, 70 years, maybe 80 if due strength. We were talking with my wife's mother yesterday, who's 88 years old. Wow. And just the things she's talking about now that she didn't talk about earlier. So we mark time. We know there's going to be an end to time, meaning an end to our lives. So all those concepts of redeeming it, that becomes even more important. Have I wasted my life? What have I given it to? And I'm even sitting here thinking, what do we say to an unbeliever about time? Because there is an end to their time here on earth. And, how we've lived our life, we're going to be responsible for the stewardship of their time, because God's sovereign over their lives too. So, boy, there's a necessary point for us all to say, how am I doing? A checkup point, whether that's an annual birthday or a beginning of the year, and New Year's resolutions. If you like doing that, I'm resolved to do something. That's not a bad thing to set a goal. Yeah. But God's sovereign over my days.
I think it's important to break that goal down into something realistic that you can ask God for daily help on, right? Yeah. And I think personally, I think it's probably best. A lot of us who set these resolutions, they're habit-based. They're like, I need to establish this habit. I haven't been doing this habit. I would suggest make it your resolution that for 30 days you will, not the entire year. Give yourself something that you can shoot for and that you can ask God, daily, give me the strength to do this. And I think praying over that habit daily, and I think making those habits be things that are most really bring those before the Lord, because maybe it's time to what may be exposed if you really prayed over your New Year's resolutions is that there are a lot of things you want to do and be that aren't necessarily on God's top priorities for you, right? And I just can't believe that if we go to, as it says in James, if we ask God for that wisdom, that He will give us that gift through the Holy Spirit of wisdom to apply to our lives. And I think asking God for wisdom in habit formation is a wise thing. So I don't know. Yeah, those would be my thoughts on it.
And I wouldn't have a lot to add there, except that I would just encourage anybody who's listening to this to don't give up trying. If a New Year's resolution works for you, then don't be discouraged if you gave up on it in February. Try again in March. Just keep trying. I think this is innate to our to the image of God within us, to want to improve and be good and be better. And I think that that's a good thing. And not to earn God's favor or anything like that, but just to be good stewards of what we've been given. I actually did read a couple weeks ago that the best way to develop habits and resolutions is actually every Monday. If you revisit those resolutions every Monday, like weekly, then you have a better chance of following through. So I think that's good. And
I think accountability too. When you think of another practical thing to add in, who can help you that really has your best in view. And
that's good.
Ask them to help out.
That's good. Well, I'm going to cut us off there. I think we could talk about this endlessly, pun intended. But I kind of think, I wish somebody like there's a great Brad Paisley song where he says, if I could write a letter to me at 17, to myself at 17, I think if I could do that, I would have wanted my 17-year-old self to understand the value of time and just the treasure that it is, and to really struggle against that pull that says we should waste it. There is a time to rest. There's a time to just be present with people. But time is such a treasure, and we should we should want to be good stewards of it and redeem it and number our days. So thank you so much for joining us for this conversation. I hope it's been a blessing to you. We would love for you to participate in the conversation. You can find us, depending on how you found this video, you can find links in the description below, or you can find us at the Calvary University website, calvary.edu, and in Calvary-Conversations. We would love to just hear from you and hear your thoughts on the things that we discuss. And we would love to hear how the conversations have been a blessing to you, as well as some things you would like to hear us talk about in the future. But let me just take this opportunity to wish all of you a happy new year, and God bless you for your participation in the conversation, as well as your support of Calvary University, and grace and peace.
Thank you for joining us for this edition of Calvary Conversations, a service of Calvary University in Kansas City, Missouri. We invite you to participate in the conversation by contacting us through the Calvary University website, calvary.edu, or by calling us at 816-322-0110. Join us again next week for another Calvary Conversation.